Hey, welcome back to Lone Star Moto. Today we're here with this 2013 Kawasaki KLR 650 and we're going to talk about whether this bike is a deal or a dud. Stay tuned. Alright, here we are back out on our KLR 650 for another video. Today we're talking about what it's like to ride this thing day in and day out. Is this going to be a good bike for you? I think there's a lot to consider when you're looking for a daily commuter or a spare second bike or an adventure bike, something that you want to ride on and off-road. There's a whole lot of things that you want to take into account. We're going to divide that up into a couple different categories. The first category is going to be rider comfort. The second category is going to be performance. And the third category is going to be cost. So when we're talking about comfort on this bike, I think this thing is extremely comfortable. And I'll say this, I've ridden a motorcycle for a living 40 hours a week, so I know a thing or two about bikes and what it's like to be on them a long time. So my bike is a 2013 Kawasaki KLR 650. It's powered by a 650cc water-cooled single-cylinder dual overhead cam motor. This bike makes roughly 40 horsepower and it's around the 450-460 pound range depending on how you got it set up. So it's pretty light, it's not very fast, but it gets the job done. So as far as comfort goes, there's a couple things I take into account when I'm looking at how comfortable a bike is to ride for commuting. The first thing is ergonomics. The rider triangle on a KLR, compared to some of the other bikes I've ridden, you're kind of tucked up, your feet are up high, just like a dirt bike. You're riding on the balls of your feet. My bike has a 2-inch bar riser, so the handlebars are up a little higher, but I'm in a pretty neutral, pretty relaxed position. I'm pretty comfortable. I'm not leaned over. I'm pretty upright. I don't have any strain on my back or my shoulders. And the seat on this bike is really flat and wide, which is really helpful for being in the saddle for a long time. You can get a couple hours out of this thing before you're really hurting and got to get off. Along with comfort is also wind protection. I've ridden bikes with no windshields. I've ridden bikes with decent wind protection, and my bike, I've updated it to have a taller windscreen. This windscreen puts the air right at the top of my head, so when I'm riding around, I'm not shaking, I'm not getting buffeted. The wind is off my chest and I'm really relaxed. Now I've ridden bikes that are way more comfortable than this with further forward controls and even more relaxed ergonomics, you know, but that's how a cruiser is. This bike, for everything this thing does, it's pretty dang comfortable. The next thing we're going to talk about is performance. So it's pretty well known that KLRs are not very fast. I'm going to do a quick pull here to 70. That's wide open. It's not bad, it's not fast, but it's not terribly slow. Here's a 5th gear pull, rolling on from 60 to 70, 55 to 70 actually. There's 60, 65, 70. So decent torque out of this thing. On the road, it's adequate, it's enough. It's enough to get on the highway and ride and get in there with traffic. I'm not scared getting on the highway with this bike. Do I wish it was faster? Yeah. But I bought this bike knowing that it wasn't going to be very fast. When I bought this thing, I had pretty realistic expectations. I knew what it was about, so don't buy one of these and expect it to be a ripper, because it's just not. On the dirt, it's plenty of power. You're riding the trails, it's fine. It's got plenty of power to break that back tire loose and have some fun. It'll wheelie. It won't power wheelie, but it'll clutch up fairly easily. I'm about 210 pounds. I can clutch this bike up without any issue. So along with performance is going to be braking. So this bike is non-ABS. It's got a single rotor up front and a single rotor in the back. And I would say the braking performance on this bike is one of its bigger drawbacks. The brake feel out of this thing is very woody. It takes a lot of pressure to really get slowed down, and it's pretty easy to lock that back tire up with the tires that I have on here. The braking on this bike is not very confidence inspiring, but once you practice with it and you build that mindset of, okay, I need to leave myself some distance, I need to be careful, and you build that into the way you ride, you're going to be okay. Don't expect to be able to stop really hard in the rain on polished concrete. It's just, you're going to have a bad time if you're not an experienced rider. The suspension on this bike is pretty soft. It's supposed to be, but it's sprung well enough with the manual adjustment that you can add some preload in there for gear and a passenger. At my weight, I run it kind of in the middle. I like my bike to be kind of stiff, but not too stiff. You definitely get a lot of front end dive when you're getting hard on the front brake, but not crazy. I've seen worse. Overall, the suspension's not terrible. As far as cornering goes, you can push it through the twisties pretty good, and it's fairly planted. Even with these dirt tires on here, it's not bad. I'm running a set of Mifos, and they're kind of a harder, longer lasting tire. As far as slow speed goes, these bikes are very easy to balance, and that's a pretty good example there. That's a complete stop. I'm completely stopped. They like to do figure eights. They've got plenty of lean angle, obviously, to do some good figure eights on these. On gravel, they're very planted and comfortable. They like it. The suspension's nice and soft. The last thing I want to talk about on this bike, performance wise, is exhaust. So this bike has a slip-on muffler on it. It's a Yoshimura RS4. It's pretty loud. It's definitely extremely loud compared to the stock exhaust, especially when you get on it. At idle, it's fairly tame. Improvements over stock are pretty good, I feel like. You feel a lot in the mid-range and low end with this pipe. It's obviously a lot less restrictive than the stock big heavy exhaust that comes on these, and it makes a big difference. Not only that, I've found that people can hear me a lot better, and if they hear me, they can see me. Typically, when I'm next to someone on the highway, they know I'm there. This guy's doing 40 in a 55. And the last thing I want to talk about is cost. These bikes are so cheap. You can get a used KLR for 3 to 5 grand with low miles. And if you're okay with the mileage being up there a little bit, you're looking at 3 grand for a decent bike. You know, as far as low budget bike goes, these suckers are cheap. You don't have to spend a lot of money to get out there on the road, and that's what makes these a good second bike. You can pick one of these up for, you know, 3 grand like I did, and have it as your second play around bike. which it's great for. So cost wise, they're very cost efficient. You just have to have real expectations of, you know, you can pick one of these up used for about what you pay for a new Grom and do so much more than you could with a Grom. You know, highway, trails, off-road, these bikes will go pretty far off the beaten path, and all of that combined with their highway capability, their touring capability, their off-road capabilities, and their mileage, I think you can get a great bike for a great deal and have a lot of fun with this thing. There is a reason that these bikes have been around as long as they have, and that so many people ride these, and that Kawasaki hasn't really changed them very much, if at all, over the years. As far as mileage goes, I've hand calculated on this bike and I've got roughly 45 miles per gallon, which compared to my truck, that's great. And it's on par with most bikes. Would this be a good first bike? If you've never ridden a motorcycle before and you go take your MSF course and you're looking to buy your first bike, would a KLR be sufficient? Not a second gen, I don't think. If you've ridden on the dirt and you're comfortable on a dirt bike, and you're comfortable with the height on one of these, send it. It'd be an awesome first bike. Eventually you'll want more power, which is why I say they're a good second bike. It just depends on your budget, really. Another thing that's taken into account when we're talking about cost is maintenance cost. These bikes are fairly cheap to work on and they're easy to work on. If you've got some basic tools and basic skills, you can do just about anything maintenance wise on these. I just did the valve adjustment a couple weeks ago on this thing at 20,000 miles, and it was cheap. If you know what you're doing, it's easy. It's not hard to get all the plastics off of this bike, get the tank off, and go to work. You know, another thing to consider is tires are cheap, oil changes are cheap. I run Rotella T6 in this bike, and it's not a lot for the big jug. The oil filters are pretty cheap. You can get them on Amazon, and it's pretty easy to do an oil change on this bike. But you can get out here and do this. You can ride around out here in the back roads in this beautiful sunset and clear your head and just have fun.